Before we begin tonight's conversation, I do want to acknowledge that the land that we are on is someone else's land. That well before we got here, this historically was the land of the Attawandan people, the Lenape people, the Haudenosaunee people, and the Anishinaabeg people. And that even today we share the land with the nations of the Chippewa of the Thames, the Oneida of the Thames, and the Munsee Delaware Nation. I also want to mention that it is really important that we do more than just acknowledge land, that it's not just about saying who is here and who is here now, but that we try to build relationships with these people, that we become friends, supporters, that we help them prosper, that we give them support as they grow and strengthen their nations, and that we find ways to be helpful instead of harmful. So if you have ideas about that, please let us know. And we are always open to having conversations on the side after this event about ways in which we can do that together. You may be tuning in from Facebook or Zoom. If you're on Zoom, then it's so great to see your faces. It's okay if you're not showing your face or your living room or whatever's going on in the background. But we are happy to see you here. The bonus of being on Zoom is that when we have our live conversation at the end, you'll be able to actually talk with Christina. On Facebook, please feel free to add things in the comments, send questions privately. We will do our best to answer everything tonight, but if there are things we can't get to, I will pass them along to Christina and she can do what she wants with them. And finally, I just want to thank all of those who have donated to tonight's event. It is so important that we pay our speakers for their time, for their energy, for their education that they are giving us. And this funding also helps us to pay for accommodations and travel expenses when the world opens up again. I'm just going to let in a few more people before we continue. Here we go. Okay, welcome. I'm going to close that up again. So, without further ado, the reason we are all here tonight is to hear from the beautiful Christina Lord. Thank you so much for being here. Christina is a Caribbean Canadian, identifies herself as a spiritual woman. She is a mother, an award-winning humanitarian. She holds a master's in adult education, specifically in community development, and she focuses on creating inclusive communities, both locally, nationally, and even globally. And Christina has committed and spent the last 40 years of her life, professionally and personally, working to better the lives of others here in North America, in the Caribbean, and South America. And she strives to promote global consciousness and unity. We are so very lucky to have you here with us tonight, Christina, to hear about your experience as you've moved to Canada and this has become your new home. So I will let you take this away and share with us your story. And when you feel like you've said all you want to say, let us know and we will start with the open discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenna. That was a wonderful introduction. And good evening, everyone. And happy Black History Month, because that's what February is. And so that will be part of what I will weave into my chat. And I need to digress just for one quick second and just give a shout out to my friend Chantal, who I haven't seen for so many years. And it's just wonderful that she's joined us. So sorry, I had to do that. It just warms my heart to see you. So welcome. And you're way up north, right? Yes. So in North Bay, yes. Where I've never been that far north in Canada. A lot of Canada I still have to explore, but yes, thank you for joining. And thank you to everyone else. And one of those Zoom advantages, right, is that we can see people from across the globe. So yeah, COVID has had a few things that we can be grateful for. So it's a pleasure for me to be here. I do have some notes and I will be looking at them because this is a pretty emotional topic for me. And so in order to help me stay on track, I will do that. So with your indulgence, I will be glancing down every so often at my work. So yes, it's I'm humbled to be sharing some of my lived experiences with you. I am a Black woman who grew up in the Caribbean, and I've called Canada home now for over 40 years. Could I say I came when I was really, really young? No, I can't. I came to study in my post-secondary education at a time when we didn't have recruiters who went to the Caribbean and other places to let people know about colleges and universities. So I had absolutely no clue where I was coming to. I came to small town Ontario and lived everything that small town Ontario had to offer, the good, the bad, and the learning. Yes, there I was. So one of the things that became apparent to me very quickly after coming to Canada was people didn't seem to know what I was. And they literally put that way. What are you? And so I would try to say things like, well, you know, I'm Caribbean. No, 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 no. What are you? Well, I'm Guyanese. No, 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 no. Well, okay, I grew up in Jamaica. No, 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 no. Finally, somebody said, we just want to know, are you Black or are you white? Now, growing up in the Caribbean, and for any of you who've ever traveled to the Caribbean or lived there or have friends, you'll know that there is just this huge diversity of people there. Historically, you know, we've had influxes of people. We had the original indigenous people who were there, and then we had the Europeans who came with the enslaved peoples from Africa, people who came in as indentured servants from China, from India. So it's just a nice big mix. And being Black or white wasn't necessarily something that we thought about. We had our prejudices, don't let me fool you, but that wasn't something that was a big focus. So I had to sort of think about, well, what am I, right? People want to know. And although I have both European and African heritage and ancestry, I sort of realized that I could probably identify more with the African lineage and would be more accepted as identifying that way than to sort of try and say, oh, well, I'm white, because clearly people told me I wasn't. So, so that's how I settled. And I don't say that I identify as Black. I just say I am Black. So, because that's who I am, and that's the journey that I have come on. One of the things, and I really appreciate the land acknowledgement, Jenna, and the beyond that, the acknowledgement that we have so much more to do, because that really is important. And it's, so I'm going to really try to just keep my eyes up here and not go into an emotional space. But one of the really sad things that I experienced when I first came to Canada was I was living with, I was doing a homestay, I was in a homestay with a very, very nice person. She was lovely, and she was caring, and she was compassionate. And she was so many of those wonderful things that I needed in my life coming to this strange new country. And yet I realized later in life that there was still so much that she didn't know. And so one of the things that she did was, in driving me around the town to sort of show me highlights and hot spots and whatever, she drove down the main drag and she said, and there were some people who were sitting outside of, I realized were bars, and some who were just sitting on the sidewalk. And she said, with no compassion whatsoever, those are Indians, they're always drunk. And I didn't know what to say, because I'm thinking, this is where she belongs, so she must know. But that didn't seem right to me. There's something that didn't feel right. Fortunately, I was able to, what I studied was early childhood education. And so flash forward, when I'm doing a placement, I was put in a placement on one of the reserves near to the community. And I was able to learn the reality of the Indigenous people. Not everything, obviously, but I was able to learn that no, those people that I saw were not the community, right? They were a part of the community, and there were an aspect, people in the community that obviously, you know, needed help and would be getting that help. But if I had not had that experience in that childcare center, it might have taken me longer to make some of those connections. So when I hear the acknowledgement, and I know that I'm here as a visitor, as a settler, I really appreciate that I have this space that I have been able to live in. So that small town had a lot of interesting experiences, and I don't share these experiences with you as a way to make you feel uncomfortable. Well, or maybe I do. Because I've come to learn that, you know, if we do feel uncomfortable, then we're probably more likely to make change. And maybe from that discomfort, I think about the fact that, you know, some sand caught in an oyster shell, right? It's that irritation, that discomfort that actually creates the pearl. So maybe if we can all sit more in our discomfort, we can become pearls. So if it's too uncomfortable for you, I apologize. I was saying to Jenna earlier that culturally, in terms of my family, we were never told to make people uncomfortable. It was always the opposite. So I'm kind of walking that balance. So, and I know that Jenna said sort of to wait till the end for questions, but if something's burning, please, you know, feel free to shut me up and ask your question. So one of the things that I wanted to share is the reason why I came to Canada to study was, well, I came to Canada because it's the only country my mother would let me come to. She had different ideas about what would happen if I went to the US. And then England was too cold and wet because she'd grown up there as a teenager. So Canada was it, knowing no one. Had an uncle in Toronto and relatives here, but I'd never met any of them. And one of the reasons why I studied early childhood education was because I knew growing up that the way that we were disciplined as children, which was spanking in school, at home, you know, we felt the strap, we felt the ruler, we felt all of that. And I knew that there were a lot of the things that I did or didn't do wasn't because I necessarily had this, you know, really great moral compass. It's because I had this person at my house that that was my moral compass. So it wasn't internal, it was definitely external. And so I wanted to learn a different way to be with children. I loved children, I wanted to work with them, and I also knew I wanted to have my own. So that's what brought me here to Canada, to Ontario in the first place, was to study early childhood education. And so some of the things I'd like to share with you are just some of the experiences I had when I first came. And I would say probably when I left home knowing what I was doing. I was this very mature, as they called me, 18-year-old, and I was ready to take the world on. A mature 18-year-old in Jamaica is not the same as a mature 18-year-old in Canada. I had no idea, but I learned very quickly. But I remember standing on the ramp of the airplane on the tarmac. There was, you know, you had to walk on the tarmac to get where you needed to go, and looking around and thinking, okay, I'm going to just go back in and say to the pilot, I've changed my mind. Can you just fly me home, please? Because I don't really think this is for me. Of course, that wasn't an option. And then I thought, well, there are 2 people waiting in the airport for me, so I better go in. So I went in, started my life. As I said before, the person I was living with was wonderful. And there were things over the next few years that I experienced that I will have to tell you, I'd completely put out of my mind for years and years and years. And last year with COVID, a lot of these memories came back. So what I'm sharing with you is what I remembered during the year last year. And they'd be triggered by different things that was going on with the Black Lives Movement and the various, circumstances. And sometimes I would just be in tears and I would have to figure out what was going on. And it was this memory that had come back to me. So one of my first memories was standing at a bus stop. And it was in a place where the bus came from 2 directions and you could take either one to get, because it sort of did a circle. So I'm standing there waiting for the bus to come. And there are these, hadn't noticed them, to be honest, but people were behind me. And I heard one person say, oh my, I love her hair. I want my hair to look like that. And the other person said, oh, don't be silly. She's an N-word, except she didn't say N-word. She actually said the word. You could never have hair like that. And it took me a couple of seconds to realize that besides them, I was the only person at the bus stop. And I had a moment of, they're talking about me. This is things I've seen in movies, but I'd never, ever had that happen. And I didn't address it. I just stood really still and waited for the bus to come and thought, okay, that's maybe where it starts. That happened about my hair a few times. That and people thinking they could just touch it, you know, oh, can I touch your hair? And they're diving into my curls, right? So a lot of things I'm learning better how to deal with, but at that time I just sort of, you know, took it all. So that was that experience. Then there was the time when, and some of them I think about in, and I have a chuckle now when I think about some of them, but there was the time when I got married, and I married a white Canadian. And there we were at the wedding, and a friend of his comes over and says, hey, this is great. We can go over tomorrow for breakfast and Aunt Jemima will serve us pancakes. And everyone in the room but me was laughing. And that was an experience I had more than once, where it was funny and it was being joked about and I wasn't laughing. And so to me, it's only a joke if both parties are enjoying it. But that was how I was told by many of the people that I met, that that's how we are comfortable. That's how we show our friendship, is by, you know, joking. So I have to tell you, I heard every horrible Black joke there ever was, and none of them were ever funny. So, you know, things went on, and I had people saying to me, you know, you're in Canada. I hope you're not planning on cooking any of that food. I will tell you that the town I was in, if I walked through the mall every day for a week, I might see 2 people who weren't white, and that would include any and every one else that you might think about. So I was definitely in a minority situation. And did I get used sometimes as the token person? Yes. And I was okay with that, because I thought, well, this way, hopefully I can share something and help to enlighten as well as I'm learning, right? So that did happen. What I realized later in life is that gets to be tiring. That gets to be tiring, because there's an expectation that that one person, and I know, you know, we have it not just within sort of the color, but gender situations as well, where you're expected to speak on behalf of everyone. And we can't. No, none of us can do that, right? We're all very different. So though, you know, things like that would happen. I did meet a lot of very caring and understanding people, people that I didn't realize at the time, just how compassionate they were and how much of empaths they were. I just thought they were nice people, but they were caring, and they would go the extra mile sometimes to try and make things be a little bit different. When I worked with children, some beautiful experiences, because I was often different to everyone in the class. And children are just perfect, you know, they don't, people say, well, children don't see color. I disagree. They can tell red from blue. They can tell that I look a little bit different than the other teacher. What they don't do is they don't judge. They just accept it. So, and they ask the most beautiful questions, and they would come up sometimes and they'd touch my face. And something really interesting that happened when I was at the daycare on the reserve was that I was they had a JK classroom, and then they had the daycare. So I was in the JK class in the morning, and I was over in the daycare in the afternoon. Now, I'm sometimes a little slow to catch up on things. I will acknowledge that. So the JK class, the building was painted white. And so I would leave there with the kids, and we'd go over to the daycare. And one day in the daycare, one of the little girls came up to me and she said, how come you work in the white school, right? Painted white. And I said, oh, well, because, you know, I'm doing my placement and I have half day there and half day here. She said, yeah, but how come they let you in the white school? And I had no idea what she was talking about. So I asked one of the other teachers about it, and she said, oh, She said, it's not because of the paint. It's because we only ever have white teachers in the kindergarten class. And I went, oh. So this girl looked at me, recognized I wasn't white, and couldn't figure out what on earth was I doing in that classroom. You know, kids notice. Kids notice, whether we want to think it or not. Another sort of fun story that happened was, so as I mentioned, my husband was white, and so was his family. And so I was in the mall one day with my sister and one of our nephews. And he was just at that beautiful stage where he was really exploring the differences between Auntie Tina and the rest of his family, and doing it in such a lovely way. So I was at the phone, payphone, remember those things? And my sister and my nephew were standing together. And then I saw this black man, again, quite unusual to be in the mall, stop. And I heard my nephew say something, but I couldn't hear what he said to him. And I thought, oh no. And this man stopped, and they're trying to get my nephew to tell them again, because he was, what, maybe 2.5. So, you know, his verbal skills still he was still working on them. So I finally hang up the phone and I walk over, not wanting to, and I get closer, and my sister says, tell Auntie Tina what you said. And I thought, please make this okay. So I bend down to him and he says, that man's chocolate, but he's darker chocolate than you are, Auntie Tina. And I said, yes, he is, because he was considerably darker than I was. Then I stand up, and the gentleman, of course, says, what did you say? And I said, oh, well, he just kind of noticed that you're darker chocolate than I am. And it's just, you know, so he laughed. And then he turned it into a moment by saying, so ladies, I'm new in town. Where's the nightlife? So we were all able to have a good little chuckle and move on. So those are just a few of the experiences that I had living when I first moved to Canada. Clearly, I got accustomed to life. Not winter, I still have a problem with that. But made a lot of friends, you know, got married, had my 2 children, moved around a little bit in Canada, and I'm still here. And it's where I would choose to be. So, so when I was thinking about this evening, I thought, you know, I wonder where my path started. Where did I start? Where did it start, this awareness of otherness, this awareness that part of what I need to do in life is to work to help to bring people together, to help us to understand, to connect, to be a community builder. Because that's even, you know, back then in the childcare centers, that's part of what I did, trying to connect families. And I would go to the States to buy books that presented diversity. And back then I could get crayons there. You know, you couldn't get stuff here, right? I mean, I remember going to, dare I say it? Yes, I will. Walmart and Toys R Us once to find a black doll, and the person at Toys R Us looking at me and saying, well, why would we have one of those here? We don't have people like that. And that was in London. We don't have people who need them here. And I said, are you kidding me? She said, well, no, how many black people live in London? I said, does it matter? Like, do you have to be black to own a black doll? Right? So, yes, so I try. I'm not an expert. I'm not the best at it, but I try. So I thought, okay, where did this all start? And I'd like to invite you to follow me, to go back with me, back to the early 60s, way before any of your times, where socially and politically, life was really changing in the Caribbean. In a small town in Western Jamaica, there's a Presbyterian minister from Scotland, and he's preparing to retire and insists that the church break the pattern of Scottish ministers and hire someone local. Because what was happening politically was many of the islands were looking at gaining independence, breaking away from England, breaking away from that colonial stranglehold. And so part of what they thought about was if they hired a Jamaican minister, the congregation might not be ready for that. Because when you've dealt with colonialism and you've dealt with oppression, it often gets internalized. And so the very people who are oppressed aren't able to recognize the talents and the way that their own people would be able to serve. So that sometimes takes time for some people. So they just didn't think. So they thought, well, let's get a West Indian minister. And I do that in quotations because that's what we were called back then, was the West Indies, because that's what Christopher Columbus discovered, was the West Indies versus the East Indies. Now we say Caribbean for the most part. So they reached out to the diocese in Guyana, which was British Guyana at the time, where a young minister and his family resided. And that is how Reverend John Lord and his family ended up in Jamaica. And I realized later in life that he, without knowing it, became a trailblazer. He didn't realize that at the time. He just thought he was getting a post in Jamaica. So he wasn't just the first West Indian to serve in this congregation. He was the first Black minister. And this was just the beginning of his path. We next moved to Grand Cayman, where he was also the first Black minister at their main church there. And he went on to serve in that sort of, not capacity, but that line as being the first Black in many areas of the church. And so when we moved back to Jamaica, he was no longer the only Black minister. By then there were many, many Black ministers. And that's where we continued to live until I moved into Canada. So we didn't realize it at the time, but when I look back now, I see it. When my daughter got married in Jamaica about 10 years ago, we went for the wedding. It was right near the little town that my dad had started in. And we went to visit because my mom was with us and she really wanted to go and see. And it was such a beautiful visit. We went into the church, she laughed, she said, well, nothing's changed here. And then we went to the church secretary had said that the minister had left, so we weren't able to talk with him. And that was fine. She really wanted to just see the church, and I don't remember the church, but she was able to tell us lots of stories, my brother and I. And then as we were leaving, the secretary came out and she said, I called the minister and he's back. He wants to see you. So in we go into his office, and he gave us a book. It's, what do you call it? Not a directory, but a yearbook, similar to like a yearbook that the church had put out a couple of years before. It was their 165th anniversary. And there we were in it. You know, in the page that was linear in terms of what year we were there. And then there was a little paragraph recognizing that my dad had been the first West Indian minister ever in that church. So yes, it was really touching. And I think that was one of the times where I remember saying to my mom, oh my gosh, how many times was he this person? I said, you know, they don't mean the first West Indian, right? They mean the first Black. And she still had a challenge around whether you were Black or not if you came from the Caribbean. So she just kind of said, okay, if that's what you want to think. But really, that's what it was. So that was a big part of our experience. And it was integrated in us without us necessarily even knowing. So another couple of experiences that helped me to continue doing what I do. So flash forward many, many years. I'm now living in Toronto with my white Canadian husband and our biracial children. And my grade 2 son comes home after school and he is distraught. He is so upset. And he looks at me and he said, Mommy, why did you marry Daddy? I said, what? Why did you marry a white man? Why didn't you marry someone like yourself? I was shocked. I never thought I would hear that from one of my children. So I said, okay, well, what's going on? And then he went on to explain to me that in his classroom, there was this little guy who was just a wonderful little person, his parents were from Jamaica. I think he had also come at a very young age from Jamaica. And he was Black. And so somehow the conversation came up in the classroom where children were asking what colors was everybody. And my dear little boy said he was black. And this other dear child said, oh, no, you're not. I'm black. And then the other kid said, well, you're not white either, so what are you? He didn't know. He didn't know. Now, we, of course, talked it through and had conversations and did our best with that. As it turned out, later that year, we moved to the Cayman Islands, where we lived for a year. And as we're driving around the island, and he's met a few people, and he looked at me, he said, Mommy, he said, I belong here. He said, look at all these people. So many of them look like me. They're all mixed up like we are. And, you know, because he was seeing a hue of colors, right? So that was another one of those moments for me. And then another moment was when we were living in Dorchester, just outside of London here. And my grade 8 daughter had to do, back then, I don't know if they still do it, but they used to do public speaking contests in the school. And everybody had to write something, and everybody had to speak it in front of the classroom, and then the winner went on to the school, and then they went on and on and on. So my daughter wrote her speech about women that she admired. And she wrote about Rosa Parks, Oprah, Harriet Tubman, and Maya Angelou. She ended her talk with the other Black woman that she admires, that being her mom. And was shocked because everyone, all the children in the class started laughing and giggling, and she didn't know what was going on. And they were sort of looking at her really strange. But she, you know, she got over that. She won. She won for her class. She was so excited, like over the top excited, as were we, and so proud of her, right? Part of that being that she has learning disabilities. So she has dyslexia. So for her to win something academic was just like over the top for all of us. Until some of the kids came up and said to her, you know, you only won because of your topic. They couldn't not let you win, or they'd be called racist. I just have to leave that there. So I share these stories to show, as I said, how I started and why I continue to work against racism and other types of prejudices. And I shared how over the past year, you know, some of those memories that came back to me. And the work that we need to do, I think, really showed its ugly face over the last year. I have learned a lot over the last year from so many people. I've had the opportunity to work with people in my faith community, people in the Black community, and allies or accomplices in the community at large. I'm really appreciative of the opportunities and recognize that the tragedy of deaths and the murders of Black people and the burdens that have taken place. But I'm also beginning to see a bit of light in that a lot of these challenges are now becoming more open, and hopefully we're dealing with them. This kind of venue, this kind of opportunity, Jenna, that you are providing to groups, to people, you know, once a month and beyond, because I know you do so much more, is so necessary, it's so needed, and I thank you. I thank you. So hopefully, you know, we're able to deal with this, and 10 years from now, we're not still dealing with some of this stuff. Because 10 years ago, we were dealing with some of this stuff. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and that we're still doing it. It's painful and it's tiring, to be honest. It is, it's painful and it's tiring. So hopefully we're able to be able to really address the inequities and the injustices and the racism and prejudices that are directed at racialized people and others, of course. I don't think that we have the market on being oppressed at all. I recognize that there are others as well. So I mentioned at the beginning that this is Black History Month. And this makes it, for me, more significant as we need to understand the history of the peoples of the African diaspora in order to be able to understand our current situation and to be able to move forward differently and make the changes necessary for all racialized people. I don't think that it's up to the Black community alone to bring about these changes. Absolutely not. The white community needs to acknowledge their place in this, and not out of guilt. That absolutely is not where this plea comes from. It's not about guilt. It's not about saying, you know, your ancestor did this to us. We are all products, I guess, for lack of better words, of ancestral trauma. We all have that, the ancestral trauma, the DNA from our own ancestors in us. So it's there, and it's just up to us all to try and heal from that trauma for ourselves and for others. So the white community needs to acknowledge their place, and not out of guilt, but from a place of acknowledging the historical wrongs and the systemic challenges, and working towards making change. And only then can we move forward together. Because I think for too long, the work has been said for the Black community. This is your issue. Racism is not a Black issue. Racism is a white issue that's been placed on the Black people. So for me, when I think of Black History Month this year, it's an opportunity to take a break, to be engaged with the community in a very uplifting and educational manner, and not just focused on the negative and the trauma of what is happening across the world. It's an opportunity for the people of the African diaspora to celebrate our accomplishments and the things that are working and going well. And to do that with other people, with others who understand that there is so much more to our people than what others think or have learned or see in the media. And I invite you all to join us in that month of upliftment and education and learning and moving forward together. So in closing, I'd like to just pay homage to Mother Africa. Her descendants, her children, are spread across the world. The diaspora throughout the Caribbean, the Americas, Africa, and beyond. We are all unique, we are diverse, and yet we all come from Mother Africa. For that I am so grateful. To have had ancestors who came from that amazing country, whose history did not start with the enslavement of her people, of her children. It did not start there. And on whose shoulders we stand, I give my thanks.
Thank you. That was entirely quotable. Your entire talk, I'm like trying to write down these quotes, and also stay tuned to what you're saying and feeling where you're taking us. So first of all, just thank you so much for that journey that you just took us on. I have lots of questions. We'll see if anyone else has questions first. If someone would like to speak publicly, oh, we have someone else joining us, Jen Slay. If anyone would like to speak with your audio on, just let me know and you can ask your question live. I'll start with oh, yeah, Jenny, go ahead.
No, please go ahead, Jenna, please.
Okay, well, I have like a whole list. So if you have one off the top of your head, you go ahead first.
It was just a thank you to Christina for sharing your experiences with us. It takes a lot of courage to do any kind of public speaking, let alone a very personal life experiences. So thank you, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. I guess it's an overall observation of, I mean, you're telling us these very hurtful experiences that you had, and yet I'm smiling because you're smiling, and I am trying to feel what you're saying, but I'm seeing you smile, so I'm smiling. And so I, you know, as I kept catching myself smiling over these very upsetting stories, I was thinking, where does she pull that from, right? How how have you mastered from as a witness the ability to talk about such harmful, hurtful experiences with such lightheartedness? Is this a coping mechanism? Is this your personality? What would you say to just that observation that I have of the fact that you're smiling while saying these upsetting things?
I would say it's probably a combination of things. It's part of it is if I don't smile, I may go the other way, and that wouldn't be pretty. Because yes, there is a lot of pain, there is a lot of hurt, there's a lot of exhaustion in all of it. And yet I feel as though if I'm going to help others and help myself, then I need to bring myself up a little bit and rise above it for the time. And I do try to be a happy person anyway, and so yeah, but yes.
So this is the second part to that. After tonight, I can turn off my willingness to be a part of this work. I can just turn this off, go watch a show, and I don't have to think about this again until I decide I want to. But you can't. And so you talked about, the weight of that, the exhaustion of it, even just the pressure to always represent, be your best, right, for your community. How do you, and maybe this is helpful for other people watching as well, how do you continue to do the work you can't stop doing and still be so happy and full of energy and want to get up every day? And what motivates you or drives you? And tell me your self-care regime.
Yeah, no, you don't want to know that. It needs help. And don't assume that I get up like this every day, right?
True.
Because
Thank you for saying that.
I want to be clear that I don't always get up like this. And how do I believe in prayer.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in prayer, and I know, and that for me it means something specific, and for others it means different things. But for me, it comes to believing in a higher power. I believe that there is a creator. I need to believe that there are better things awaiting us, and that's what keeps me going. I have 3 grandchildren. And as I said, children are a big part of my life, even before I had those 3 grandchildren. And so I want to make sure that I do what I can for their future and their children's future, and so on. And I know that what I can do is just one small part, but I got to keep doing that small part for as long as I'm able. Because that's important. I mean, I have, like I said, two of my grandchildren are twins. Their dad is Indigenous. And so, they were laughing and running around the house here the other day, and my granddaughter looked at me and she said, I am so lucky. It was Monday when we were watching the Black History Month stuff for the children on Monday evening. And she said, I'm so lucky. She said, I'm Indigenous and I'm white and I'm Caribbean and I don't know anybody else who's all those things. And so I want for her to keep that joy about who she is.
Beautiful. Natalie, I think you had something to say.
Yeah, I do. First of all, I love the talk. Thank you so much, Christina.
Thank you.
My question is, what do you think, just in general, are some steps that just everybody, no matter what, no matter the race, can take just as a society to kind of help change some things that you experienced?
I think you're doing one of the things right now, right? I think educating ourselves, learning about those people, those situations, those perspectives that are different from ours, and being respectful of them in the way that you're learning about them. Ask questions. Most people are genuinely willing to share if the question is asked in an inoffensive way. So And we live in an age where, well, look at where we are right now. You know, you can turn to your phone and pull up information on anyone or anywhere in the world that you want. And so that's certainly another way of getting information and joining events. So I actually have the Black History Month calendar here of the events that the London Black History Coordinating Committee is planning, recognizing that's only one of, you know, several groups that are planning activities. And I can tell you that if you go to LBHCC, and maybe Jenna can put that in the chat. So www.lbhcc.ca.
All right.
LBH, there's an H, history, London Black History Coordinating Committee. And then that will bring up the website and you'll be able to see some of the events that are going on. There are events for all age groups. And actually there's also one that we're having for Black and Indigenous youth, an opportunity to get them together to learn from each other and to share some of their shared experiences, because there are some experiences that they do share. So yes, sort of, you know, it's COVID time, so get on your couch and reach out and learn.
Before I ask another question, does anyone else have a question? Okay, so you had told the story of your daughter winning the speech contest, and as a parent, I can imagine how proud you were, and then, you know, to be completely let down by this comment that someone had made. I'll say it a couple ways. How can we begin to change that you trust our intentions, and how do you decide, or how can you tell if our intentions are authentic and supportive and genuine instead of just the you know, race card or the tokenism or the avoidance of being called a name we don't want to be called? How do you distinguish, yes, this is a white person I can trust, and what can, again, not putting more work on you, what work can we do so that you know, like, is there a secret handshake we can do? Like, what can you do so you know that, like, we mean well and we're still learning? Like, what can you speak to a little bit about trust and how we navigate that together?
Yes, I think, and this is obviously just from my perspective, okay, I'm not speaking for anybody else, but I tend to lead with love, okay? So I am optimistic, and I've been told I'm too trusting. And so I tend to trust until you prove yourself untrustworthy. Now, everybody doesn't do that. I will acknowledge that I do have a certain amount of privilege that others in our community, in my community, do not. I have lighter color skin. I've traveled. I've had an education. I've had the privilege of an education, not just in terms of secondary, but also post-secondary. And so I acknowledge that. And so my circumstances might not be the same as others. But I do tend to trust and hope that what I'm seeing or who I'm seeing is what they really are. And sometimes that leads to pain, right? Because then you get hurt. Mm-hmm. But I'm also learning to be more honest. Not honest because I wasn't dishonest before, but to be more open, perhaps, more vulnerable, like sharing this evening. Huge step, huge step, huge step. But, you know, I've had some practice this last year, again, working with some wonderful, amazing people that really helped to drag me out of my comfort zone in the best possible way. And so for that, I'm very grateful, Miss Jen being one of them. So. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Any other questions before I keep asking? Feel free to just take yourself off mute. I'm just going to check our Facebook. We have a couple comments. Eleanor says, so beautifully presented. Thank you for being a voice for Black people, Christina. Donna says, Christina, you are so gifted in so many ways. Thank you for your vulnerability and authenticity. Okay, if there's no other questions, let's see here. Have we gotten better? So there's a lot of times, white people say, well, it's not as bad as it used to be, right? Mm-hmm. Or things used to be this way. And, there's the recognition that just because it's better doesn't mean it's where we need to be. But, in the 35 years you've been on this planet, have you experienced better? So, that horrific experience of you at your wedding and that comment of Aunt Jemima, like, I would like to imagine that wouldn't fly as often, or at least there'd be some people who wouldn't laugh today. Not that anyone ever should have laughed, but do you feel like we're coming further from there? Does it feel like things are getting better?
I would say yes, it does. And like you, I would hope that it wouldn't fly quite as easily as it did then as well. And I yes, I think it has. And I say that because when things started falling apart last year in May with the murder of Mr. Floyd, and then the Black Lives Movement, which has been around for a long time, but stepped forward a little bit. And I think COVID gave us that opportunity to pause and really see what was under our noses, right? And so for myself personally, what I experienced, in addition to the memories and the exhaustion and all of that, were people who I've been speaking with for decades, some of them, reaching out and saying, hey, how are you? Reaching out and saying, I get it. I understand now what you've been trying to say. So when I hear that, I'm hopeful. There's a book that I don't know if many of you have seen it. So I should go back to Natalie, who asked about this book. White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. I had two friends really good friends. One of them called me, and she never calls me. She just emails. She said, have you heard of this book? I've just finished reading it. Now she is in her 70s, white woman in her 70s. And I always thought she was pretty open and accepting, right? And she did too. And she said, it is incredible. She said, I didn't know how much I didn't know, And then another friend of ours, based on the recommendation of this friend, went and got it out from the library. Number one, she was upset that she could just take it off the shelf. She said, when she finished reading it, she said, there should have been like a lineup of 100 people waiting to get that book. But when she first started reading it, she said, I don't think I'm going to learn anything new. She said, I kind of know the stuff that she talked about in the beginning. When she finished it, different story. She came back and she said, okay, this is a must read. We should be able to somehow make it mandatory for every white person to read this book. Now, there are other books that are similar. I will give you that. And there are many books written by Black people about racism and anti-racism that are very good to read, and I highly recommend them. What I think this book does is it breaks open things for the white community. And there has been some controversy about this in terms of why would we let a white woman talk about racism? I say we have to do that because she speaks to the white community in a way that we can't, in a way that we have been for centuries and not made the same impact. So yes, Natalie, have you read it?
I haven't read it actually, but I was putting that in my brain because I really want to read that book now.
Yes.
Actually, I have a follow-up question too. So you just said, and I think I feel this way too, but overall, things are getting better, right? But when I think about something that I'm passionate about, which is feminism, in some ways there's regressions, even now from even 10 years ago. Like in most ways, obviously things are progressing, but there's definitely some things that do regress. And so it even kind of like when you said that your friend was like, why isn't everyone reading this book? I could just go to the library, pick it off the shelf, no one else is asking for it. And that's just kind of one thing. It's like, you know, are we talking the talk, not walking the walk? That's maybe one thing that I can think of. Is there any other ways that you see that maybe there has been a regression?
I honestly don't know the answer to that question, because as I'm thinking about it, I'm not sure if it would be regression or if it's just perhaps things that have been undercover. And so when we see them, we think it looks like a regression because we thought we had moved forward more than that. So that's why I'm hesitant in my answer to that, because I don't know that I could unequivocally say, oh yes, there's been, you know, regression, because I think there's so many aspects that are coming forward now that people think, oh my gosh, I thought we'd moved past that. And some of us think, well, maybe we thought we'd moved past it because it was kind of underground, you know. And certainly here in Canada, you know, one of the things that many people think is that we don't have racism in Canada. Now, hopefully there aren't as many people who think that anymore, but that's been, you know, we didn't have slavery, we don't have racism, you know, we're this wonderful diverse group of people who get along, we're all polite, and that's all so superficial, right? So we're now seeing some of the underbelly, and is it regression or is it just coming out?
Right. Yeah, that's, and I totally can see that.
Yeah.
I totally.
Yeah. And I wonder about feminism as well, if there's not a bit of similarities with that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Great question. Anyone else have, just unmute yourself if you have something to say. Just checking. All right. You spoke about your placement on the reserve and how that allowed you to, you know, have firsthand experience with the Indigenous community. And I think you even mentioned that you don't know if it would have taken you longer to kind of change your perspective of Indigenous people had you not had that experience. And so, you know, one of the things that we are encouraged to do is to take a look at the people we're surrounded by. Do they all look like us? Are they all white people? And without sort of, you know, grabbing a Black person's arm in the street and saying, hey, will you be my friend? How do we create spaces in our life to get that firsthand experience with people who don't look like us in order that we can learn to love them and understand that they are just like everyone else within that community? Any thoughts on that, or any thoughts on even just, you know, the idea that to break down some of our stereotypes or our biases or, you know, racism, that we need to have that experience with each other? What are some thoughts on that?
That's a great question, and certainly a very that's a deep one. I think that certainly, as I mentioned earlier, you know, going to say, you know, events where, you know that they're going to be, and within the City of London, we have so many different kinds of events. And it might not be that you're going to meet your best friend, but it's even to go like to Sunfest, you know, you might be sitting next to someone and just politely say a hello. Not, hey, hi, can I be your best friend? Because you're Black and I'm white and I want to know, but, you know, but just like you would, how do you meet the other people that you know? Right? How have you met any of the, you know, in the workplace? Like there's so many different places. And I think to not be afraid to reach out, because I think I've heard people say that, well, you know, does it seem kind of weird if I'm sitting beside someone and I say hi? And I'll say, well, if it were a white person sitting beside you, would you feel weird saying hi to them? If you would, then yeah, don't say hi. But if you wouldn't, if you think of yourself in that situation, if it were someone else, how would I feel about that? Then say hello. Like I said, they may not become your best friend, but gradually you say hello to enough people. This is how we create friends. How many people do we see in the grocery store and we smile at them, or we almost run them over with our cart or whatever? Oh, sorry. And, you know, sometimes Well, isn't that one of the places where they used to say you could go and find a mate, right? So same kind of, you know, just be available, be open to that. This is going to sound a little bit hokey perhaps, but to the energy, right? That surrounds you, that lets people know as well, because there's that, we give that energy off, right? Do we really want to meet someone, or are we afraid? You know, who are you sitting beside me, type of thing. But to just be more open, and obviously with safety in mind. I don't want you going down the street at 3 o'clock in the morning to meet somebody of any color, right, type of thing. But yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Anyone else have questions, comments? Again, this is an opportunity for us to ask questions that we might normally maybe be embarrassed or worried.
Yes, please don't be embarrassed.
Right? Everyone here is here with good intentions. So if you're worried it's going to sound harmful or hurtful, you know.
I won't take it that way at all.
Yeah.
I do have another question. If there's another question in like the chats, feel free to
go ahead.
But so you did mention at one time, so during Black Lives Matter back in June was really you know, kind of becoming part of our general consciousness. You said that you did have people reaching out to you and saying, checking in on you and how you're doing. And it sounds like you.
Sorry, I can't. You're fading. Sorry.
Sorry. From the computer right now. Is this better?
Yes, thank you.
So I'll just start from the beginning, just to be clear. So you said that during in June, when Black Lives Matter really came to the forefront of our conversation, you had people reaching out to you. And from the sounds of it, you said that you appreciated that, right?
Yes.
Right. So I have actually heard from Black people who said that they don't like that when people reached out to them. And so, I mean, of course, everyone's entitled to their own feelings like that. But I think sometimes maybe people who are wanting to be allies, it seems people get scared because they know that, well, this person, like I saw a friend posting on social media about this, and she said, I'm Black, but I don't like when people like are reaching out to me, like, of course I'm fine, or something like that. And so it's just, and this happens with, let's again, to come back to feminism, this happens with feminism, where some people are this, some people aren't okay with this. And so I'm even kind of still trying to navigate that. So how do you have any tips for navigating that world of where everybody, and of course everyone's different, but do you have any tips regarding how to be an ally in that situation, or any situation like that?
Right. So I think I fully understand what you're saying, and I also had moments where I didn't want to be asked as well. Right. And it would depend on who it was coming from. So the situations I mentioned were good friends, people we've been having these conversations for years, kind of saying, I get it. There were also people who reached out and said, tell me more, make me understand this. That's the stuff that's tiring, right? That's the stuff that's tiring. So I think that in terms of allyship, and again, I'm by no means an expert in this, and as you said, everyone responds differently. But to have that in mind when you're approaching the person, and if it's a friend, it's obviously different in your relationship, and just sort of feel things out and not put so much, because the times that I felt tired was when I felt that I was being burdened, that there was an expectation for me to give to them. They wanted me to tell them what it was. They wanted me to make them feel better in a way so they could have the conversation and say, well, I talked to a Black woman and she said, like, no, I don't want to be that person. But I think letting people know that you're there, holding that space, and saying, I don't fully understand it. I'd like to, I'm learning. But while I'm learning, please know that I'm here. Right? And then speaking out, if you're in the grocery store and you feel safe, because safety is a huge aspect of it too, right? If you feel safe to say, to step in on someone's behalf, not to speak over them or to speak for them, but to say, hey, looks like you're having a problem. Do you need some assistance? Right? Or I'm right here if you need something. So they know that somebody's got their back. but you're not taking over their space, right?
Yeah, yeah. I love that. Actually, that was so helpful for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
A question that sort of comes from what Natalie was just asking is, I think sometimes, and again, I can't speak for all white people, but we sort of look at it as Black people, as like, there's one of you and you all have the same experience. And one thing that I'm curious to know is, well, one, that's not true, but you as a Black woman in the larger Black community, what don't we know about being Black in a Black community in terms of how, you know, there might be challenges there for you? I mean, I don't know because I'm not in the Black community. So
Right.
are there some things that you hope that we come to understand as well that will help us be better supports?
Yes, good. Wow, like digging questions. Absolutely, we are diverse. I mean, our diversity comes from the places that we came from. So, you know, the Caribbean, like all across the African diaspora, right? And then when I think about sort of the Caribbean, for example, we talk about the different shades. So we have what's called colorism. And a lot of our challenges go back to historically to the days of enslavement. And so back then, the white plantation owners would rape the slave women, right? And then, you know, they would have children, and they would that was done purposefully, and they would pit people against each other. And so you would end up with different status based sometimes on your color, on different aspects of the way a person is, whether you're stronger or less strong, things like that. And so I think that, that a lot of that continues. And most people in the Black community are aware of something like that and are working on it, right? So that's just like a little insight. But yes, we do. We have our own challenges that we are struggling to overcome ourselves and to recognize. We have the ancestral trauma, right? That's been meted out to us. That's in our DNA. That we're trying to work on. But at the end of the day, I think for most, there's a recognition that there is one thing that pulls us together, and that's the oppression and the systemic racism, right? So, I mean, that's one area that I don't know, I'm not good at stats, so I couldn't give you, but that most Black people can agree on, you know, regardless of all of our other diversity. Because also at the end of the day, we recognize that many white people, when they look at us, they just see Black. They don't see, oh, Jamaican, and which we do see, right? For the most part, or we hear in terms of accents. But, you know, people look at Black people and they say they're from the Caribbean, they automatically say, oh, you're from Jamaica. Like Jamaica is like the place, right? Yeah. If you're from Africa or Nigeria, like those are the two places that people know and they pinpoint right away if you're from there. So,
wow. Thank you. Chantal has a question.
Oh, I'll just unmute myself and turn on my camera again. Yeah, just, oh, it's so great to be part of this. And I'm in North Bay, so it's a community of 50,000, just, you know, north of Huntsville. But of course, there's like actually lots of Black people. But it gets, you know, like labeled like a white community. And I was just realizing we had a very nice turnout for Black Lives Matter at our city hall. There was more than I would say, almost 1,000 people. And a student shared her high school experience here in North Bay. And she happens to live across the street from me. And she's biracial. And when you started talking about your experience, your kids' experience, grandkids, I've really been struggling with this because I would like to support this local school board in doing a better job of being able to do some Black education. But, you know, really the biracial thing in North Bay is really the issue for most of the families that they struggle with. And it's great to have a picture up of Martin Luther King on the wall in the Student Success Center, you know how it goes. But I just wonder, you know, do you have a perspective about what are great resources for the biracial community in the school system?
I don't, but I will look into that. Because yes, it definitely, and I think it's something that's going to be, that's increasing, because we are having more partnerships, right? Between not just black and white, but you know, Asian and so definitely something that is increasing. And so I can't think of anything off the top of my head, Chantal, but
you know, like I say resources off the top of my head, because you know, like I'm actually a librarian, but
right.
But what I really mean is, you know, I think maybe you would be able to reflect on, you know, what is a supportive environment for kids? And how do you build that? Because in fact, we know that a lot of classrooms aren't supportive of kids who look different, kids who are racialized. And, you know, as my neighbor's daughter said, she was not treated as though she was a girl. In fact, she even overheard in her high school hallway the boys talking about, well, I think there's like 11 girls in the class. And then, of course, there's
wow.
and the boys did not see her as a girl. That's what she overheard, right? And it was not surprising to me that she was very brave in speaking. She's just graduated from high school now. She has been more than once someone who attempted suicide. And I thought, isn't that amazing? So not only, and I'm sorry to bring up such a painful topic,
No,
but
it's
this is
important.
our reality right now. Not only is there nothing in the school system, because I don't see pictures of, you know, people with hijabs on for the kids. I don't see stories at Christmas time for Diwali or Chinese New Year's. And yes, we do have, I've never seen a school in North Bay that doesn't have at least one family with you know, a woman wearing a hijab who's one of the mums, or a Chinese student. You know, there might not be 10, but there is that diversity. So the school board hasn't done really anything that's obvious or that's been experienced by families as tackling issues of how do we talk about our differences, how do we celebrate them. And I'm going on and on and on, but you get what I'm saying?
I do get what you're saying. I thank you for sharing that, as painful as it is, and I feel for that student. And it sounds as though it's a bigger issue that has to be, I mean, leadership, right, has to show the way. So whether that's your board, the principals, the teachers, I mean, somebody has, and I think it's more than just a racial issue. It also seems like it's bullying as well, right? Because which I mean, the two kind of go hand in hand. But you know, if this young woman is being targeted, it then becomes bullying, right? It might start off as something racist, but it's clearly bullying when they continue to do it. Yeah, I mean, you know, for someone to be able to reach out to her, your kids aren't in school anymore, are they? Like they're.
Oh, actually, you know,
Are they still in
I
school?
have a 14-year-old and a 17-year-old, so
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
older. But
So
my
it
kids,
hasn't been that. It has. Well, I remember when you got when you had the kids, but
it's
I
17 years
couldn't
ago.
remember how long ago that was.
Yeah.
So that's why it feels like you've been gone for so long. But yes. So what happens in their classrooms? I mean, because sometimes you can start small, you know, in terms of having a conversation with teachers who perhaps, you know, might be open to something, and have that talk about maybe bringing someone in, like for Black History Month, for example. You know, I mean, you know that because when you were here, right, you ran that list of speakers to go into the schools.
Yeah, that's so fun. I mean, to me, it's all about a big party, right? Like, what's more
Yes.
fun than
But we can get a
celebrating?
little more serious now, especially with the older grades, right? To sort of maybe show them what they're doing, because I know that, I believe anyway, that our children who are behaving in the way that those boys were behaving probably don't really understand why they were doing what they were doing, and they need help to understand that. That is my, I mean, I say that because I come from the best place of my heart when I'm, right? I don't want to assume that they were, and there may be one or two that are, you know, not as nice. But when you get a group like that, they feed off each other, right? So individually, they might have very different responses, but all together, there's that safety in being able to say what you want because your buddies are all there to speak with you. But yeah, I think I would say that, and you said you're dealing with the board, right? And
Yeah, well, it's interesting on a number of levels. I think, getting the ball started, whether it's, in your workplace where you see things happening, or in the classroom if you're a student, or if you're a parent, getting the ball started is always tricky. But I'm an eternal optimist, and of course in my lifetime, because I'm a lesbian, it's like a sea change. So what we have in our school board is a lot of resources for kids who are queer identified.
okay.
And I mean, the language is beyond me now because I don't even know what to call them anymore. But whatever. The LGBTQ alphabet soup, right? But there's peer supports, and so what I thought was very interesting is now we're seeing the Indigenous community, which is also undergoing some changes, positive information happening in the classroom, and supports for families, and anti-bullying issues around the students that have long hair because of their Indigenous traditions, constantly getting called girls. There's things that happen in the classroom. They bring in an elder,
Right,
so
right.
I think that the experience of seeing those changes, it's like, how is it that we don't have those changes and not something about these obvious physical characteristics that are bringing up these kind of racist attitudes? Because there's not enough of a community to have community community issues, like, because there's not a Black neighborhood to have.
Right.
It's really about perceived differences rather than people's experiences.
Yeah. I think advocacy, because I'm guessing that the Indigenous community have people who have advocated and said this is what we need to do, and the same with the queer identity communities as well, right? Is that someone or group has stepped forward and said, we won't have this anymore, and have advocated. And so who maybe to find who are your Black leaders in town. I mean, they will exist whether you are aware of who they are or not. There will be some 1, 2, 3, 4 people, male or female, that people would know that if they have a real problem that they would go to, and address that with them, recognizing again that sometimes the Black community doesn't always fully understand the biracial people either, but are more likely to recognize that, because the leaders of the groups, or even the young woman's parents, to have a conversation with them if you know them, and just sort of say you wondered, kind of, she made it through high school and that was great, and was there anything that others could have done to make it easier for her, or even talk to her herself, right? And find out what could be done, in addition to reaching out to the teachers and different people that and sort of say, it's interesting how we, in some communities haven't even began to look at the LGBTQ communities, right? I mean, that they're just, so it's so, I don't think I was very helpful, I'm sorry, but
No. It's, these reflections, sometimes you have to circle around the issue. Like, like I was really appreciating you saying, much like sexism, it's not Black people that have a problem. Right?
Right.
We have to figure out why it is, as people creating the societies and the neighborhoods that we love to live in, how come it is that, the Jamaican international students in North Bay cannot find a place to rent, right? And it's really about the Jamaicans who come as international students, right? It's all about what someone from North Bay hears when they pick up the phone, and there's an accent, and it's like,
that's right.
That's what I want to you.
Yes, absolutely. It's why we don't get jobs, because we have certain postal codes, and like, why would I do that? Yeah, so much to unpack.
Great.
So much to unpack.
Thank you, Chantal, for bringing up that systematic stuff that we often hear about, but we don't know where do we start with. I also appreciate, I have been admiring the books behind you, so I love that you said you were a librarian. That was so perfect. I want to be mindful of your time, Christina. Before you go, is there something that you can leave us with that might be what you think white people, I'm going to generalize, are missing about this entire experience that we're trying to navigate together, whether that's and you can decide what that experience is, whether that experience is equality, whether it's uplifting and supporting one another, whether it's whatever you want to call it or see it. What are we missing as part of the journey to move forward together? That you're like, if they could just get this one part. What can you leave us with?
Well, I think, and I'll go back to what Chantal was just saying, and in terms of whose role it is. I think that what's missing is the recognition that it is your work to do, and let us play the supportive role for a while.
I love it.
Because I think we need to be part of it too. We're in this together, but for now, take on the bulk of it, and we'll be right there behind you.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time, for your insight, for your stories, for your willingness to share some very sensitive parts of yourself with pretty much strangers. Thank you so much. And I'm gonna speak on behalf of all of us that we're gonna take what we've heard tonight and we're gonna do the work. Whether you're proud of it or not, we will take the things that we've learned tonight and put them into practice.
Yes. Like I say, I'm trusting until you show me otherwise. So I trust that you will do the work. And I just say, lead with love, with authenticity.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much for your Wednesday evening.
Yeah, thank you. And
I
thank you,
appreciate you taking the time. And thanks for inviting me, Jenna. It was, and it felt very special having this month as well.
Yeah.
So that was like an extra little, this is awesome.
I'm glad we were able to get you in such a busy month. Thank you everybody who came, who was a part of the space together. It's so much more tangible and experiential when we're doing this together, especially when we can see your faces and have these conversations. Whether you said something or didn't say something, your presence made a difference. And I just want you to know that we can do and say a lot by showing up, even if that's all we can do until we can find a way to do more.
Absolutely. That is important. And I appreciate the questions and perhaps for some the courage that it took to ask those questions.